Hi, welcome to Keeping It Young podcast, conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. I am Charity, and here is my mom and dad.
Hello, and welcome to Keeping It Young, conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. I'm Dave.
And I'm Bethany.
We're the Youngs, and we are delighted that you have chosen to join us today.
Yes.
This has been quite a whirlwind. We started this earlier this year, this podcast, and Beth and I we'd thought about it for many years. We've talked about, hey, let's do a podcast, and we would go to conference, and people say, you should do a podcast, and really, in a way, it was just, let's just add one more thing to our busy lives.
Right.
And but we thought about it during the COVID earlier this year. We were able to be home more. We had several cancellations, and things just worked out. We prayed about several issues, and just some things we didn't know how to do, and God put the right people in our lives, the right equipment in our lives, and lo and behold, here we are, months down the road now, and Bill and I are just really incredibly amazed and overwhelmed at how many of you have written to us, have sent us messages, we've met you in revival campaigns, couples retreats, and even just surprise along the way, Facebook messages and Twitter messages and all of those sort of things. And we're just really, really thankful for our last time I looked, we had well over 20,000 downloads of the podcast.
That's a lot.
It almost makes me laugh because we were thinking, a couple of hundred people would listen to it. And, and so we really are just like, wow, what in the world? And we're just so honored and grateful that we get to have this part. And I hope you'll like it. I hope you'll continue to share it. And, put it on your social media and anything like that. If it's a blessing to you, I hope you'll let others know.
Right.
And we certainly want to be a blessing to them. You can go, if you haven't visited our podcast website, I hope you will, keepingityoungpodcast.com. And there's on the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see a little microphone. And you certainly can send us a voice message from there. Just click on that microphone and speak right into your computer, your phone, and it'll record it, and it'll actually email it to us. And if you have a question, if you have a comment, if you just want to say, hey, just send it to us.
If you have a topic idea.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
and anything like that. Beth and I would be thrilled and happy about that. We've had a wonderful fall here. I know that the year is coming to an end, and we've just been so blessed. We've had great meetings around the country, and we've been able to continue serving in our revival campaign. We are actually recording this in the state of Michigan, where we just have been amazed at the weather. We arrived, and it was a very sunny, beautiful day. And the next day, the temperature just bottomed out. We about froze to death, and then it rained, and then it snowed.
I think there was a little sleet.
We just got it all. And today is a beautiful day. A little on the cool side, but a beautiful day.
Gorgeous fall.
We're enjoying the ending of fall and getting ready to head into our winter time. And for those of us in Florida, we're not sure what that means.
We're headed back home for a Florida winter.
The dear friends here in Michigan, they'll understand winter weather, you folks in the north. But we're so glad that you've joined us today. And here's what we've been doing. Beth and I have been talking with you on the subject of family success. And we know you want success in your marriage, and you that are raising children, you that have grandchildren.
Yes.
We know that you want success in your family. And so we've covered several weeks here of information. We talked about the single most important word in raising children,
which is training.
Training, that's a great word. And we talked a little bit then about understanding the issue of training.
Yes.
And we emphasized that for some time, what it means to train and what it means to train our children individually, because each one is unique.
Right.
And their strengths and their weaknesses vary. Beth and I talked with you about the three important areas of training. That's where we've really been the last couple of weeks, you that have joined us. And if you remember, we talked about give me your attention. This is really dealing more with the younger children, you that have younger ones.
Yes.
Because what you're trying to train your children to do is to listen and obey.
Yes.
Listen and obey. And don't be discouraged in that. Sometimes you'll have a child that is just very compliant. And they just, and let me tell you, if you have a child that is just naturally more given towards compliant and easy to train, then you should get on your knees right now and thank God for that child. And if you have another child or, 2 or 3, God will probably bless you with at least one that's strong, what we call strong-willed in our culture.
Yes.
And if you're dealing with that kind of where you're in the midst of training right now, a 4-year-old or a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old or a 7 or 8-year-old, and you're like, for crying out loud, well, be encouraged. Training works, and it's never been accomplished overnight. And God gives you 18 years. So if your child is 5 and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, I feel like I'm losing, well, just hang in there.
Yes.
You got about 13 more years. And surely in these next 13 years, you can overcome these issues. So give me your attention. Then we talked about give me your heart.
Mm-hmm.
And the give me your heart is really about teaching our children truth.
Right.
And Beth and I really work at that one. I hope you are as well. And we always, always have to teach our children truth. And then we talked about give me your hand. We didn't park as long on that one.
Right.
But the teenage years are wonderful years if you put all these together, and they're opportunities to take your teenage daughter, your teenage son by the hand. I'm using that figuratively, obviously.
Right.
And take them by the hand and train them, prepare them to be the adult that they need to be.
Right.
And there's a lot involved in that. And, of course, we talked about teaching our kids to work and teaching them to love God and teaching them to have devotions. The teenage years really are wonderful years. And surround your children with opportunities to get to know God. Christian camps, if your church wants to take the kids to Christian camp, be all in about that. Make sure your kids get there.
Right.
I've met so many young people that Christian camp was just an asset to parenting, that the parents wanted their children to make right decisions. And you send your kids to a great Christian camp, they'll hear the Word of God. And in that intense environment of training God's Word and yet combined with incredible fun at a camp, it's amazing how God can get hold of a child's heart there.
Yes.
So camps, a Sunday school, church, youth groups, youth meetings, and all of that is absolutely wonderfully vital.
Yes.
And use every tool you can to help your children and to get them on the right path. Now, we're going to change gears a little bit for the session today and probably next week. And we want to talk to you about this issue of obedience. And really what I want to talk about is teaching obedience. And just off the top of your head, my love, what do you think of? What illustrations, stories, what do you think of when you hear this idea of teaching obedience? Just off the top of your head.
Well, a lot of times parents think, the first thing you think of is that you say no a lot. And you do. When they're very young, especially when they start to get mobile, you say no a lot. And you think, I'm never going to train them not to touch that, not to go there, not to say that. But you do. You eventually do. We had one of our children, who will remain anonymous, who we thought we were never going to win the battle of obedience, and then not just obedience, but happily obedience at the same time. And there were times where we were a little discouraged. In fact, there was probably about 8 or 9 months there that we were pretty discouraged. And he was just a little guy, but he did not want to obey. And we were encouraged, though, by parents that were older than us that would say, just hang in there. If you get this child headed in the right direction, he will go the right direction the rest of his life.
And that is what the Bible says.
And so we did. Consistency does pay off, even when you're discouraged about training that obedience.
That is so true. And we're training them for life, We're surrounded by rules. Every job.
That's true.
You may have a dress code. You have to wear a tie to your job, or you have to wear a dress to your job, or a uniform, whatever it may be, or you have to abide by a speed limit in your town, or, you have to be at work on time and work till a certain hour. There's all kinds of rules in life. Yes. And we're training our children, when we train obedience, to succeed in life.
Yes.
And so really, let's just jump right in here and talk about expectation. Sometimes I think a lot of times parents of younger children maybe fail to really train obedience because they don't have an expectation.
True.
They just all they're trying to do is survive, or or just force the child, do what I want you to do and stay out of my hair. I don't have time for this.
Right. A lot of times obedience for a parent is just focused on that, my comfort, my you not annoying me at this time. And so it will change from day to day. Your child won't know what their obedience goals are, because one day mom and dad don't want you to be loud in the house, and then the next day they don't care if you're loud in the house. So
by having an expectation, here's a key word we want to give you: expectation. The idea being, if you don't have a goal, then you shouldn't have an expectation.
Right.
So in other words, if your goal is that you want your child to always say yes, sir, when you speak, or yes, ma'am, or no, sir, or no, ma'am.
Right.
If you want your child to say thank you when they are given something or receive something.
Right.
If you want your child to obey the first time you ask, so that you don't have to count till 300, or you don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to force the issue. Nobody has to get angry to get response. If you have an expectation about that, a goal, then you're able to help your child to start the process of learning obedience.
Right.
So we're talking about having an expectation. Our expectation with our children was that they would respond first and fast, and we would say with a happy face and a happy heart.
Yes.
And we said that a lot to our children, that when mom speaks, when daddy speaks, you respond first.
Yes.
And the first time, meaning the first time you're told, jump to it and do it quickly. Don't put it off. And you know, we have young'uns still in our home, and that in a sense doesn't end. Even with a teenage son, I've said in recent days, hey, son, look at me. I know you're getting older now, but obedience doesn't stop. Meaning that when you're asked to do something, you don't put it off. You don't ignore it, or you'll forget it.
Right.
Or you will come across as disobedient
or disrespectful. I think sometimes as children get older too, they think, well, I don't need to do that right now because she didn't say do that right now. And so we do have to remind our older children, if I ask you to do something, that's probably because I want you to do it right now.
Right. And as our children get older, we also say to them, acknowledge that you heard it, and if you're not going to do it right now, then make that known.
Right.
So it's okay to say, yes, ma'am, I heard you tell me to take the trash out. And as soon as I finish my algebra problems right here, I will take the trash out.
Yes.
And so I'm trying to teach my son, you don't just stare off into space and we wonder, did he hear me? Is he there? Hello? Did I speak a foreign language? No, by teaching our children to respond, this is primarily oriented towards our children being younger.
Right, but I think what we're doing is we're just throwing it out there that we're still
training
in this training of obedience time, and it does change from season to season.
Sure. Mm-hmm. So we're teaching obedience. There's an expectation. What do you desire? Mm-hmm. Do you want your child to go to bed happily? Do you want them to get them up? They awaken and get up quickly? Right. Do you want them to clean up their room right away? Do you want them to say thank you in a certain way? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. You have to, as a husband and wife, or if you're a single parent, just think through, what goals do I have? What do I want my child to do?
Right.
And it may be that you're thinking, my child is 2 and I can control my child. I'll just force it. You can, but there'll come a day that the child will be bigger than you, stronger than you, and probably more stubborn than you. And an unhappy teenager that's never been trained to be obedient can hold out a long time and make your life miserable.
Well, even a child smaller than that. If you've been to Walmart and you've seen
no kidding.
Children that are throwing a fit, and if they're dead weight on the floor, there's no way that parent's going to pick them up and,
so it's
and
far
do something
better.
with them.
It's far better to have a goal here.
Yes.
And the expectation then brings us to a second word, and that is the word explanation. And I wrote beside that in my notes, a thorough explanation, but a brief explanation.
Right. Don't be complicated.
And what I mean by that is that you've got to make sure that your child is learning the expectation. It's not a separate goal from the expectation. They really happen simultaneously. We want our children to obey first. So I don't know how many times we said to our children, look at your daddy. Were you told? And yes, sir. Okay, what do we expect you to do? And we would make our children say, obey first, fast, happy heart, happy face, happy heart. Right. And so what are we doing there? We're explaining. And many times we'd say to our children, what are we not doing that we do not lie? We never lie. Lying is wrong. We never lie. When our kids were younger, we would say to them, you have to say, may I be excused when a meal is over.
Right.
And when you're excused, you have to say, thank you, Mom, for the meal, and I love you. That was our expectation. So how many times in our raising children with our 5 have we said, what do you say to Mommy?
Yes.
What do you say for the meal to Mrs. So-and-so? What do you say to Pastor for the meal? And we didn't expect our children to say to a random pastor, thank you for the meal and I love you. We didn't expect that, but we did expect our children at home to say that, so we explained it over and over and over and over and over. And so if you have an expectation and you combine that where you're explaining, you don't have to have a revival meeting every time there's an issue, but a continual explanation is vital for a child.
Right.
You're putting into their heart the expectation by your explanation.
True.
And sometimes we get tired of that. How many times, and you ever heard a parent say this, how many times have I told you?
Right.
Well, obviously not enough. And you say, but I've told them 100 times. But think of it like this. How many times does God have to speak to our hearts before we finally get it? He was with his disciples, grown, hardworking men for 3 years. And I almost chuckle when I read through the Gospels and how many times Jesus said to them, I came to die, and they're going to kill me, and they're going to take my life. And when it happened, they were all like, what just happened? Why did he? They totally missed it. And I think our children, because of the way life is, they're in a learning process. And while our goal is to put in the hearts of our children and the habits of their life to where obedience becomes second nature to them. They're just going. And the wonderful thing about that is if we win, our children will be sitting in church, and God will speak to their spirit, what we would say their heart. And it's second nature to our children to say, yes, Lord. Yes, God, that's what I'll do. And so the expectation, explanation are very important. Before we leave that, do you have any further thoughts, my love?
Well, they kind of go hand in hand. And I think what we're trying to say here is if you do not explain to your child what you are expecting from your child, then you cannot expect your child to fulfill your request, and that means to obey your request. So basically, your child has to know what you're wanting.
Right.
And that's, I think, all we're trying to say here.
And moms and dads, when they're younger, they don't always understand why.
Right.
So you don't have to explain to a 2-year-old why they cannot touch the oven.
No.
They just have to obey.
Right.
And you can't always explain to a 2-year-old why he can't run in the street. He has to obey.
Right.
And by this, what I mean by the explanation, I don't mean you're explaining the why of every detail. This is why, why. There comes a time for that, and there's a place for that. When your child is with a right spirit learning and growing and is obedient, some of the whys just click into place without being explained. But our teenagers have every right to come to us and say, and my son recently even said, hey, Dad, can I talk to you about something? Why do you not let me do, and he named such and such. And sometimes it's a very, very definite philosophical reason or practical reason or spiritual reason. And sometimes it's just because, well, you know what, you're my kid and that's the way I like it.
That's right.
But when I'm honest with them about that, we can chuckle about it, laugh about it, and even sometimes say, I tell you what, if you are willing to make some adjustments here, then we can talk about this again.
Right.
And maybe permit something we haven't permitted or change something in a way that would be different. So the explanation that I'm talking about is really a continual reminder of your expectation.
Right.
First, fast, happy face, happy heart.
Right.
Obey quickly. I want you to say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. It's a continual reminder. Really, the word may be better as reminder of what you expect.
Right.
Anything else about that?
Just make sure that you're making it very clear. Sometimes I think as parents, we are frustrated at a child who is not doing what we'd like them to do, or they didn't do it exactly the way we wanted them to do it. And if you were to go back and think it through, you would understand that maybe we didn't make it as clear as possible. And the thing about children is that they are bright. They can catch on, but they cannot read your thoughts.
Sure.
And they cannot absolutely imitate what's going on in your head as far as what you were thinking as you saw it all played out. Oh, my child, she's going to obey exactly like this, and she's going to do exactly this thing. Well, she can't do that, but she can obey to the best of her ability a fully clear command given by her parents.
Absolutely. And that's really good. So we're talking about teaching obedience, and we have the word expectation, meaning we share with them what we expect out of them. And then we explain. We're thorough about it, but we're brief. We're really just continually explaining, reminding our children.
And I think when you say, too, that the explanation part of this gets longer the older they get. So that if I have just a toddler, a brief and firm but loving no is more than enough sometimes.
It's about the limit of your
to tell them, don't do that. No, and you're looking at their face. And then as they get older, I think that's what we're talking about as far as the explanation part of it. Yeah,
and as they get older and older, the explanations involves scripture reasonings and philosophical reasonings and a whole lot of the why. And those are opportunities for great discussions.
Yes, they are.
And when your child is obedient and is 15 years old and is coming to you with a definite thought process regarding a matter in your home,
Yes.
what a time to disciple, what a time to
Yes.
further enhance what you are wanting in the heart of your child.
Right.
And so it leads us to another word that is very big, and this is one we'll have to do at least part of next week.
Okay.
But the word is the word correction. Because if you have a child, what you know is that your child will disobey.
Yes.
Your child will be unwise, be unkind, be
Yes.
disrespectful, be unthankful.
Yes.
And the key word you'll find in the Bible is that we have to correct. We have to correct. In other words, we do have to take every negative behavior, and it has to be paired with a negative consequence so that our children learn that in life, when I'm not right, the results of that are painful
Yes.
and devastating and sometimes deadly.
Right.
And so correction is a really huge word. I was just, Beth and I were talking before we started the podcast today in Proverbs, which is just a tremendous place to get wisdom. I was looking in Proverbs and the first few chapters, like in chapter 1 and verse 2, Solomon is talking, Solomon, the son of David, is talking to his son. And he says to his son, I'm writing this to you so that you will know wisdom and instruction, you will perceive the words of understanding, and you will receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity. Notice he says to his son, I want you to know, perceive, and receive what I'm teaching you. In the second chapter, he kind of says the same thing. My son, if thou wilt receive my words and hide my commands, incline thine ear unto wisdom, apply thine heart to understanding. What's he saying? My son, as I'm teaching and training you, I want you to receive it. I want you to hide it. I want you to hold on to it. I want you to apply it. Chapter 3, he says, my son, don't forget my law. Let your heart keep my commandments. He says in chapter 4 that a child should hear. Now, this is a key word. Hear, ye children, the instruction of a father, and attend to no understanding. In verse 1 of chapter 5, my son, attend unto my wisdom and bow thine ear, your ear, to my understanding. In other words,
Right.
what he says is that you've got to listen to me. Remember that phrase we had several weeks ago about give me your attention.
Right.
We get that from Solomon here. My son, listen to me as I'm teaching you. Listen to me as I'm training you. Listen
Right.
to me as I'm leading you. The same man that emphasizes so strongly here the idea of listen to me, follow me, receive what I'm trying to teach you, apply it into your heart, and embrace it with your living.
Right.
The same man then is the one that teaches us that our children have to be corrected.
Yes.
And he's very detailed about it. And Beth is going to read some verses here to us. Listen to Proverbs 29:17.
Correct thy son, and he shall give thee rest. He shall give delight unto thy soul.
Now, chew on that just a moment. If we correct our son, he gives us rest, implying that if we don't, there's no rest. There's
There
no
will
peace.
be no peace.
And,
Yes.
and if you really want to see a picture of that, just observe people with children out in public. And there's a big difference between a child that is well taught and well trained
Right.
and is learning obedience. The parents are at ease. There's no tension.
Right.
There's not a battle in the middle of the grocery store over
Right.
a candy bar or a piece of candy. There's no, I've had it with you. I'm frustrated. I'm uptight. What is
Right.
wrong with you? There's no yelling. The point here is that our children are going to be disobedient, and whether or not we teach them by correcting their disobedience will determine whether or not we have peace and joy.
Right.
And when you win this battle, you mommy and daddies, you young mommy and daddies especially, listen to me. When you win this battle, what he says right here is there's peace and there's rest.
Right.
And that's a delightful way to live.
It doesn't seem like it right at the moment. And this, of course, will follow. If your child knows the expectation, you have explained the expectation, and if there is direct disobedience, this is where the correction comes in. And so when that correction time comes, it does not feel very peaceful or restful for you or your child.
Sure.
And especially if you're going through what I mentioned at the very beginning of the podcast, that we had a child that really tested what we thought of as a parenting and biblical parenting. We just kept thinking, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. But I will tell you that child now brings peace and rest to our hearts and
So
our
he's
souls.
talking about future fruit.
Right. This is
Absolutely.
future fruit.
Yes.
But even now, sometimes parents will think, oh, I cannot correct my child. I'm in public, or, it is worth it to take that 5 minutes and maybe go to the van or, back to your minivan, or go back to your car, and even just to give them a little firm talking to of correction, it is worth it then to be able to continue your trip through the grocery store in peace and rest.
Absolutely. We're about out of time, but listen to Proverbs 22:15.
Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him.
Now that is true, isn't it? That foolishness is bound in the heart of our children.
Yes.
And the word foolishness here is not that they're joking and playing. The word foolishness here is that our children, by nature, will do wrong.
Right.
By nature will rebel. By nature will get angry. By nature will be rude and be unkind and be unthankful.
Right.
And he says that's natural to a child. But he says here that God has a plan. It's called the rod of correction that drives it far from him. And we're going to talk about that in the next next podcast, this rod of correction. But one of the things I want to remind you is the rod of correction is the same word that is used of the shepherd who has the rod. In Psalm 23, that rod shows up when he says that his rod and his staff comforts the sheep. And this is a negative connotation in our society.
Right.
And some parents are like, oh my goodness, for crying out loud, I can't believe the Bible talks about a rod. But it really is a beautiful explanation. And we're going to talk about that in the next podcast.
Right.
What does that mean? And how do you wisely apply the Bible here in a generation of people that see it as such a negative in the training of our children?
Right.
Moms and dads, think about how important this is. Beth and I have sometimes been with parents who said, hey, we're going to go out to eat, but there ain't no way we're taking our children. Well, what do they mean by that? It might be something practical. Maybe the children just aren't well. But many times that is said in the sense of, there is no way I'd want to put up with my children in there.
Right.
And when my children are with me. But you know what? We have many friends who have practiced what the Bible says here, who have diligently trained and taught and corrected their children to the point that to be around them is a delight. They can converse. They can sit quietly. They, in fact, sometimes we have taken our children, and we're not the expert. Please don't think I'm listing us to be like us.
Right.
We're all in this together trying to train our children.
Yes.
But I remember taking our children many years ago when they were fairly young to a nicer restaurant. We were on vacation, and we went into a restaurant, and there was an ambiance. Is that the right word? Ambiance in the restaurant. And apparently the people that owned the place were a little terrified that we were going to blow the ambiance with our children.
Brought it. I think we only have 4 at that time, but we brought all 4 in.
There was such a nervousness, and they were like, oh my goodness.
They just hovered.
And then when it was all said and done, they were all like, wow, your kids are well behaved.
Right.
Well, yes, they were, but the reason they were is because of the hours of praying and training and correcting.
Right.
And praying and training and correcting.
Sometimes crying.
And crying and praying.
That was us crying.
And correcting. And sometimes the children do.
Sometimes too, yes.
And so this works and this pays off. So we're out of time today. We'll come back with you next week and talk with you in a little bit more precise, practical way to correct. And so I hope you'll join us next week. This is Keeping It Young podcast. And, of course, I'm Dave.
And I'm Bethany.
And we are really, really, really happy you joined us.
Yes.
I sure hope that you are succeeding in the home. That's our plan for you. That's what we want. And I know that's what you want as well. Yes. All right. Have a great day.
The Keeping It Young podcast is a Bax 5 Media production. All rights reserved.